From Washington, D.C., this is a Your Voice, Your Future Vote 2014 special.
Well, Iowa, we did it! We did it!
It is the day Republicans dreamt of.
From the biscuit line at Hardee's to the United States Senate.
From Iowa to Kansas.
We did it!
Georgia to Colorado, toss-up states turning red on the map and giving the GOP its biggest trophy in years.
To pick the shackle of gridlock and to fundamentally change the dysfunction of Washington, D.C.
Now the Senate majority President Obama has relied upon so heavily is gone.
He's going to have no other option than to work with Republicans to get things done.
To everyone who voted, I want you to know that I hear you. To the two-thirds of voters who chose not to participate in the process yesterday, I hear you too.
Presidential last-minute stumping even in blue states falling short, where a Maryland businessman became only the 7th Republican in 100 years to win the governor's seat.
Wow, what a historic night in Maryland.
Democrats did defend in New Hampshire, shutting down a surging Scott Brown, and are holding on desperately to a razor-thin lead in Virginia.
It went a little longer than we thought.
Declaring victory, though the Republican says not so fast.
There are still some precincts remaining out as well.
And overtime now a certainty in that battle for the bayou, where no candidate could get 50%, setting the stage for a December runoff.
I issue a challenge to Congressman Cassidy. 6 debates, 6 hours.
Joining us for our election roundtable discussion, former Republican Governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore, Democratic Congressman Jim Moran of Virginia, Charlie Hurt, political columnist at the Washington Times, and from the Washington Post, political reporter Sean Sullivan.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Thuman. An eventful midterm election night to say the least, and in many ways, it is still not over, but the headline today, the Republicans seize control of the Senate, now making them the majority party in both houses. The GOP needed only 6 seats and so far have taken 7 with a couple of races still to be determined. We are joined by our esteemed panel to discuss how these elections will shape our government. But first, we want to take a closer look at the numbers from last night. Leon Schulte from Rasmussen Reports joins us now live from the newsroom. Leon, let's begin with a state a lot of people were keeping close tabs on all night long, and that's North Carolina. What did we see there?
Yes, Scott, North Carolina was a race that was very close the entire time we polled. It was inside the margin of error. We had multiple lead changes between the two candidates. And at the end of the day, the Democrats were depending upon the African-American vote turnout to turn that race in Kay Hagan's favor. But it appears as though Tom Tillis and the Republicans had the better ground game in North Carolina yesterday.
Leon, I can't think of many more, let's call them entertaining races across the country last night than what we saw in Iowa. Joni Ernst, what was her formula for success? Why'd she pull that one out?
Well, Joni Ernst, like the North Carolina state that President Obama had won in 2012, she was polling again neck and neck with Bruce Braley, but she always was a little bit ahead of him in our polls. And what happened with Joni Ernst is she ran a real spirited campaign. She didn't make many mistakes at all. And at the end of the day, she not only won by that margin, but she, I think, enjoyed the momentum of the Republican surge as a whole, and she blew that margin wide open.
Yeah, and we actually saw a bigger margin than some people predicted in Kansas. Pat Roberts was really in the fight of his life there, wasn't he?
So the last time we left Kansas, the Republican Party was in a little bit of dysfunction due to a Tea Party primary. However, late in the game, the Tea Party did endorse Pat Roberts, and it looks like party unity was the name of the game in Kansas. Again, Roberts well outperformed expectations, and Sam Brownback, the governor, did so as well.
All right, outperforming expectations. That's the next segue, Leon, because we're talking about Ed Gillespie. This is a race that a lot of people thought Mark Warner would just kind of run away with. All of a sudden, we're talking about thousands of votes. A lot of people afraid to declare it even at this hour.
I mean, Ed Gillespie is in the position that every underdog that was down roughly double digits is in. The nation's talking about his race. He has made his mark as a candidate, win or lose. Ed Gillespie has put his mark on this race, and it still remains to be seen where this race will end up.
All right, Leon Schulte from Rasmussen Reports. We'll check back in with you right now. Let's talk to this panel of people we've brought together to kind of break down what we saw last night and what we're still seeing, because it's not over. I want to start with you, Governor. Republicans, every reason to smile last night?
Absolutely. But I think it's because that we saw a true wave election. We saw the American people as a whole look at their situations, look at the economy, the international crisis that we're in the midst of right now, and they felt uncomfortable. They didn't feel like they had a really great future. There are polls where Americans are saying, well, the next generation won't do as well as the last generation. That's positively un-American. I think people were uncomfortable with the status quo, and they decided to vote for a change. And that's what we saw nationwide, everywhere. And a lot of people were beneficiaries of that wave, of that movement. Brownback in Kansas, Roberts in Kansas, Gillespie in Virginia, a lot of other people, Scott in Florida, a lot of people, the governors of Massachusetts and Maryland, for heaven's sakes. This was a big move that the country decided that it was time for a change.
Reason for bragging rights?
Sure, absolutely. And I think, but I don't want to be premature about this. I think the burden is on us now to go forward and offer a positive program for the United States of America. That is our duty, to show that we can competently govern and that we can put forward a positive program, and I believe that ought to be economic growth.
Congressman Jim Moran, is there a reason, if you're a Democrat, and you are, to smile at all today?
No. Unless you've been drinking or smoking something, you're not going to be smiling.
Which you can do in more places.
You know, it was a referendum on the president and on the Democratic brand, and the referendum was decisive. It's now, you know, the founding fathers, as you know, Scott, originally intended that it only be older white guys who owned 25 acres of land or more who could vote initially. And those are the ones who are most likely to vote in off-year elections. This is going to be a very different political scenario in 2016. I do think that some of the Republican candidates, in order to appeal to their base, double down on conservative issues that may come back to haunt them 2 years from now. But right now, you know, Republicans are at the peak. They have more power than they've had since Herbert Hoover in the early 30s, I think 1931 or something. So, you know, I don't mind Jim gloating. They earned it. But I do think the silver lining is likely to be that things are going to change dramatically. And if you look at the demographic trends, this is probably the high point of Republican political dominance in this country.
Does that make you even more content with your decision to hang it up?
Oh, gosh. Yes. Every day that's gone by has validated the decision to retire. This is going to be a tough 2 years to get anything done. You know, the Democratic caucus that's left is more liberal, probably less anxious to get legislative changes that might get through a Republican Senate. I don't think that the president is going to have much of a legacy other than Obamacare. You know, some of this could be racism. Some of it could be the Fox News effect scaring people. Some of it could be all the money that was poured into these races, but it couldn't have been all of it. The reality is that we who believe in government have not been able to make government work. And the president has to be a little introspective on this, too. You know, there has been the initiative of the Affordable Care Act. It was off to a bumpy start. It's going to be transformative in the long run. The fact is, we haven't had an appropriations process that has worked for 5 years. We haven't been funding, you know, the physical infrastructure of this country. There's $2 trillion that is unfunded today. That would have created so many jobs. We haven't been making the investment in education and job training that we need to be making.
It's just an overall lack of progress by Congress.
Well, yeah, that people look at what have you done. And there's not a long list of legislative accomplishments. Now, you know, we can explain that, and Harry Reid has explanations. But the Congress is dysfunctional, and the president has not been able to pass the kinds of things that I think people expected him to be able to.
And we saw exit polling last night. 8 in 10 people at one point saying they're upset with Congress that was driving their factor to go to the polls. Charlie, Sean, we talk so much about President Obama. It's hard to keep him out of this conversation. Was he enough of a drag that in close states, Arkansas, Colorado, Iowa, did he hurt them? Is that why the Democrats are hurting so badly today?
I would argue that was the #1 cause in places like Arkansas. I think that we can't overstate just how bad of a drag that was. And clearly what we saw in North Carolina with Kay Hagan, you know, bringing him in at the last minute to do under the radar radio ads obviously targeting black voters. That tells you all you need to know about just how toxic the president is. But I have actually a question for you, Congressman. Do you think that your old colleagues should replace Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi?
That's got to be, that's got to be done internally. We're not going to discuss that. Harry Reid raised a load of money, and Nancy Pelosi raises more than anybody, even Steny. And the fact is that as we have a smaller caucus, that caucus is much more in tune with Nancy's policies, and probably the same holds in the Senate. So, they're probably stronger than they were when they had a much larger caucus to deal with.
Well, an answer from the Democrats. No, I'm sorry.
Well, and Sean, we just mentioned Harry Reid. He's going to have to hand over that gavel, it looks like, to Mitch McConnell out of Kentucky, who was willing to put $1.8 million of his own money into this race. He wanted it so badly. He gets it. What tone do we have now? And as we talked about, as Charlie brought up a good point, we really didn't see President Obama on the trail. He was out there for a couple of weeks. Yesterday, he may as well have been out of the country.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question now, is what tone do we get? Republicans are saying, well, look, we can end the gridlock. Now we can finally return to business, into regular order in the Senate, and we can get things passed. But the reality is President Obama is not going to roll over. He's not going to sign bills that Republicans send him that make big, large-scale changes to his health care law and other policies that he's staked his entire presidency on. So really, if you're Mitch McConnell right now, you have to pivot from just running hard against Obama and against his policies and saying, well, what can we do? What can we get done? Because the reality is Republicans now are looking at a tough map in 2016. I know it seems a little early to talk about 2016.
We will talk about that later in the show, though. But so then what gets accomplished? I mean, are we just looking at more gridlock? I talked to someone as soon as all the results were in last night. She was devastated. She's a Democrat, and she said, I'm just so upset because what happens now? Does anything happen? Do we get, Jim, I mean, you're still up there on the Hill. Does anything happen?
It's possible to get trade promotion authority because both the House and Senate Republican majority want it, so that we could have some trade deals with Asia and Europe, and that will create more jobs, bring more revenue in. I think most of the Democratic caucus is likely to oppose that.
What happens with immigration? Do we get anything in the next 2 years?
There are some executive orders that the president wants to make. I think the Republicans are going to object to those. That's a tough slog, although there are some Republicans who understand if we don't get right by immigration, we're going to get, it's really going to come back to haunt us in the 2016 elections when the Hispanic electorate will be voting and will be making a real difference in the southwestern states.
Let's talk about branding, if you don't mind. And Governor, you ran the RNC. Of course, you also governor of Virginia. Branding is so important. And I brought this up on the last show that we did last week, where Rand Paul went out and said that the brand of the Republican Party, quote, sucks. Now, last night, it certainly didn't.
That was elegant anyway.
Wasn't it, though? Yes, he's got away with words. But my question is, clearly, they did fine last night. Sean brought up that 2016 is going to be a much different scenario. But what do you do to change the tone on the Hill? It is so divisive. If you're advising the GOP at this point, okay, fine, you've got both chambers. What do you do with it so it's not 2 years of nothing?
We can talk about immigration, trade bills, and so on like that. I think your viewers need to focus on what the American people are concerned about and what they responded to and what they said last night. And the people of the United States are unhappy with the direction of the nation. They're unhappy that they're not making any new wages. Their wages are stagnant, and they have been for years. They're unhappy because they lost their jobs. Then when they got their jobs back, they weren't earning as much in wages as they used to, which means that's a diminution of their quality of life, of their standard of living. They're concerned because they see these crazy people in the Middle East saying death to America and cutting people's heads off. They're reminded about the 9/11 attack. They're reminded about the dangers that we're seeing with China and with Putin in the Crimea and the Ukraine and those kinds of threats. The American people are not comfortable with direction, and I think that we need to be. So, in answer to your question, the Republican Party's brand needs to be forward motion, forward-looking response to the concerns of people. And that's why I entered into these races. I formed a PAC, I called it the Growth PAC. I purchased television and radio advertising in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in North Carolina, and in Virginia. And when everybody abandoned Ed Gillespie in Virginia, We were in there doing major advertising for him with a very positive message on the theme of growth, which became also, of course, Ed's theme and his positive message as well. And I think that people were responding to this. They want to see a change, and I think that the Republican brand needs to be responsiveness to that desire for change in a positive way, and that would be what I would propose for the Republicans.
Okay, let's talk about the Democratic brand for a second then, and I want to run a comment that we just had from Rand Paul speaking about what this means and what the results from last night actually say about the tone of the country, specifically the Democratic Party. Here's Rand Paul.
Frankly, I think that yesterday was a repudiation of Hillary Clinton. Think about it. 90% of incumbents win, but over 50% of the candidates that she campaigned for that were incumbents lost. So that is a message that the public sent both to the Clintons, to President Obama, and to their policies.
Normally, it takes blasting caps and dynamite to get incumbents out of office, and that is a stunning record for the Clintons this time. The fact that they were of no help in Arkansas, the fact that and interestingly, they didn't even go into a place like West Virginia, and I think probably because it was fairly clear that they would not do much good there either. So President Obama is probably the biggest loser out of this election, but it certainly suggests that Hillary Clinton might not be quite the rock star that I think Democrats have been dreaming she's going to be in 2 years. And all along, and I realize that I must be completely wrong about this because every smart person says I'm crazy. But Hillary Clinton's a smart woman. She has been here before. She has been awaiting coronation before, and
it didn't work out.
And it didn't work out. And she was 8 years younger.
Yeah.
And I still hold out the real possibility that she may not run, and I think that leaves Democrats in a very, very difficult position.
Okay, well, the numbers often tell the story, so I want to go back to the newsroom to Leon Schulte from Rasmussen Reports. We're going to talk about a couple other races and figure out how things went. Leon, let's talk about Georgia, because a lot of people were kind of surprised at how that turned out, even if they thought it might go Republican. Perdue really put it on at the end there, didn't he?
That's right. Georgia's a race that we had in a tie, even at going right into the election, and it was a toss-up across the board on other pollsters as well. At the end of the day, Georgia was very important for the GOP because, again, they were defending Saxby Chambliss' seat, and if it was going to go to a runoff, it could have made things a lot harder. However, like in Kansas, it appears though the GOP ground game showed up in Georgia and pulled Perdue across the 50% threshold, 53%, and also brought Governor Deal along with him.
All right, let's talk about two races that are still outstanding. Louisiana, because Georgia avoided the runoff, Louisiana is not. They're looking at another month of campaigning there. What do you think we are seeing trend-wise in Louisiana? Was there a takeaway from last night that indicates who's going to win that one?
Well, actually, Louisiana, according to our polling, is going exactly as planned. We had Landrieu winning last night, and in a potential runoff, we have Bill Cassidy winning that by about 4 points right about now. However, it's a long time between now and the runoff.
And Alaska, where we love to wait days sometimes for ballots to make their way by boat from remote islands. What are we looking at?
Right. Alaska, one of the states that actually went late into the night for obvious reasons, is not called yet. But we have Dan Sullivan up about 5 points, and it looks like from the results now, that's right about where that race is. So we're standing by that, and that's what we expect, where we expect Alaska to fall out.
All right, last one I want to talk numbers with you for is Colorado. That was an interesting race, and it's a state that Barack Obama won twice, won handily last time around. Why suddenly, and they won the governor's seat, right, Hickenlooper? So why suddenly do we lose this race if you're a Democrat and you see Gardner come out on top?
Well, Cory Gardner, I think, is indicative of a candidate that matters, as we've talked about before on this show. He ran a very spirited campaign. Udall made some missteps, obviously, with the war on women and the Denver Post coming out and endorsing Gardner. But along with Joni Ernst, Cory Gardner and some of the other candidates, Cotton, seem to be like very promising young candidates for the GOP. And I think what we saw there was the candidate and a bunch of missteps from the incumbent.
All right, Leon, thanks so much. When we did this show last week, Congressman, you said not such a big deal if they take the Senate, because these days you need 60 votes to really pass anything of major consequence. Is it a big deal what happened last night?
It's an enormous deal. Of course it is. this transforms the political scene for all of us. This was a wave election, and it came on the heels of another wave election basically 2 years ago. So, you know, actually in
but they don't have
2010.
60 to pass a lot of measures in the Senate. They still have to get to 60 on a lot,
they still have to get to 60, and you know, to get to 60 votes is almost impossible electorally. But
and then on top of that, there probably needed to be veto proof.
But you know, the McConnell is going to find a couple of senators that he's going to Democratic senators he's going to rely upon, and I would suspect that he's going to have his way. But the main thing, though, as you suggest, is almost everything that the House and Republican majority is going to want is going to get vetoed by the president. It is very difficult to override a veto, even in this newly shaped Congress. So I don't think you're going to see much legislative action.
Is it all just showmanship then? Because what John Boehner has been saying for 18 months now is look at the bills that we continue to send over to the House that sit and collect dust. Now, it goes the other way, too. But he continues to harp on that. Do those get taken up now? They get voted on, they get passed, only to be vetoed by the president? And does the president's got to be careful. He doesn't want to be vetoing everything. He's only done it a couple times.
It's high-wire politics at this point. I mean, for both sides, you know, they can't make mistakes, and it goes for President Obama, obviously, but even more so, I think it goes for Republicans as well.
Governor, what do you tell? Let's make you switch parties for a moment here. The president is having over congressional leaders to the White House Friday, and he's going to kind of have a meeting, maybe a come to Jesus, a kumbaya moment on how we get forward for the next 2 years with any progress. If you're President Obama, you sit down with the leadership. What are you telling them right now?
Well, I think that I would tell them that if the Republicans come forward with a positive message on a program that's in the best interest of the American people, that has an opportunity to really increase wages, that has a chance to increase jobs, to employ people in the African American, Hispanic communities and single women that are trying to make ends meet, that families can actually see some raise. If the Republicans do that, I'd cooperate. Why would you cede that ground to the Republican Party? I would say, listen, let's all get on board, and you know, compromise runs two ways now. Instead of the Republicans always having to meet the Democrats halfway, maybe the Democrats can now meet the Republicans halfway and be in favor of a really positive program for the best interest of the country.
You know, Jim, no offense, but
you can't offend me.
You're talking.
This is a great day.
You're talking in generalities, and that's what this campaign was about. It was almost content-free. There were no specific proposals that anybody's going to do. What it comes down to is you want to deregulate, you want to cut taxes. President Obama in January of 2013 accepted 87% of the Bush tax cuts, all of which had been deficit financed. And a lot of that money just goes outsourced by corporations because they have cheaper labor abroad or buying machinery to automate manufacturing processes. I don't know, I haven't heard from the Republicans what you're really going to do to help the middle class get employed, get a higher standard of living.
Here's the specifics. Right now, the previous Congress has allowed all ability to make investments in private corporations and in equipment and people with lathes who have to hire people to work those lathes. It's now more difficult. The capital gains tax has been increased, which means there's going to be less investment. That needs to be reduced. Obamacare has some remarkably good things and some remarkably devastatingly bad things that are making it very, very difficult for the economy to grow. Dodd-Frank is devastating the banking community, particularly the community banks in this country, which makes capital harder to get.
Does Keystone Pipeline go through?
It probably does, and it should.
Is the president willing to sign it?
Well, listen, wait a minute. The big ace that we have to play in the international crisis that faces us is the energy opportunities that are being developed. If the Keystone Pipeline continues to develop those opportunities for energy development in the United States, the American people are going to demand that. Is the president going to veto that? I say have at it. And then let's see what happens in 2016.
I see that as one of the big compromises that the president makes.
That's where he's willing to play ball.
Yeah,
sure,
even though he sent it out to DOJ, we continue to delay the process.
It's not even a winner for Democrats.
Let's talk, we're winding down a little bit here. Let's talk, and Sean, I want your take on this. Fascinating what we saw last night in Maryland in the gubernatorial race. I mean, absolutely a shocker, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is what happens when you have a Republican wave election. Races that didn't look competitive until the very end all of a sudden come onto the map. I mean, this is pretty remarkable, and you pair that that with what happened in Virginia, and you pair that really with what we saw all across the landscape. You know, Republicans winning just about every toss-up seat that they needed in the Senate, doing very well in governor's races. I mean, they were defending 22 gubernatorial seats, and they gained seats. They've gotten to 31 right now.
What about Florida?
Florida is a remarkable one too. I mean, you have, you know, now you look at somebody like Charlie Crist, who's tried to reinvent himself. He was Republican, then an independent, then a Democrat. You know, it's unclear where he goes from here. But Rick Scott was somebody who was looked at, you know, as somebody who, how is this guy going to win? You know, a year and a half ago, and here he is. He keeps his job. Rick Snyder in Michigan keeps his job. Scott Walker, another top target of Democrats, he wins pretty easily. So these are all Republicans and Democrats thought, you know, a year and a half ago
Does
that
Scott
they could
Brown
defeat.
have a political future left? After losing Massachusetts, going New Hampshire, losing again, does he have a future?
That seems like a tough one to me. But I think that the races in Wisconsin and Michigan are very interesting because unions very much targeted those two Republicans, and for such an important constituency of Democrats to lose in both of those places in those particular labor states is pretty significant.
All right, we've got just 2 minutes left. Let's go biggest surprises or biggest takeaways from last night. What do you think?
The biggest surprise has to be Maryland. That's just
Larry
stunning.
Hogan.
Yeah.
All right.
And, but also the fact that we were sitting here talking about as many as 11 races last night could go Republicans' way. They didn't. I think it's going to be 9. But the fact that there were 11 in play at one point last night is pretty stunning.
Sean, what caught you off guard?
Ed Gillespie. I mean, here's somebody who, you know, most people say, well, look, he's going to run. He's going to maybe lose by 5 or 6 points, set himself up to run for governor. I don't think anybody saw this coming.
Governor?
Well, we're certainly pleased with the Gillespie outcome. Biggest change for me was the fact that the wave came in so big, which meant that Governor Brown back in Kansas, who was written off by everybody, won re-election in Kansas, as well as Senator Roberts there. And that would probably have not happened except for the fact that the country made a decision to move in a particular direction.
Congressman, I know you probably needed some ulcer medicine after watching last night, but what's your biggest surprise or takeaway?
Well, it was the consistency. This was a national election. They voted Republican every place, in the Midwest and the South, and even in some places in the Northeast. And you know, people all over the country were apparently thinking very much the same way, and you had the same kind of turnout effect. So I was surprised that these local elections really became a national referendum.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Wonderful conversation. That's all the time we have in breaking down what was clearly another dramatic shift in American politics. We'll continue watching those 3 remaining races and bring them to you as they happen. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night, everyone.